What's up, gangsters? It is a fine Friday in June out here at Rube Goldberg Enterprises, and it's time for another one of my absolute favorite kind of videos, which is a "Hey, look, I'm done" video. But if there's a scale from 1 to 10 of from 1 to 10 of yeah, this was fun, I could have worked on it some more, to holy crap, I'm glad this is over, this is a 12. Yeah, this one is done, and I'm super glad, because this is version 2.0 of the Accurate Miniatures b-25b Mitchell in 1/48 scale. And if you're immediately asking, if you hate it so much, why did you build a second one? And that's a fair question. You would have had to have watched my entire 10-part build series on version 1.0 to understand all of that. But if you didn't and don't want to, stay tuned, because this will give you a pretty good idea. But basically, the answer to the question, why did I build another one, is I'm a whore. What can I say? Somebody threw a lot of money at me, and I was initially very unenthusiastic about doing it. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, first of all, this guy is a serious art collector, and he's paid me a tremendous compliment by even asking me if I'll do something, and so I need to take that into consideration. I mean, it's not very often that you're going to get that kind of attention. I mean, I know that from my photography days. That's just the reality of that sort of thing. So he had my attention. Yeah, I mean, I was flattered, and who wouldn't be, right? But that wasn't enough, because I guard my time jealously. And I was not really going to be quick to give it up. But he's a super cool guy. He totally understood my situation and my position on pricing, and I made him a fair price, and based on what I thought was based on an estimate of what I thought it would take me to get it done, I gave him a fixed bid, as I think you always should, and he accepted it. So at that point I was like, oh damn, now I actually have to build this thing. But that's okay, because I was also, part of why I was doing it was also because I wanted to see if I could justify a fixed bid business case for commission model making. And I could write a case study on what's transpired. Because what I did was basically say, look, I think it's going to take me this many hours. I want to make a certain dollar per hour rate, plus expenses. There's the bid. So anyway, that's what I did. I also wanted to do it as a test of my skills, to see if basically 3 years down the road, had I learned anything since I built the first Accurate Miniatures Mitchell that I did. And I felt like for all of those reasons that it was a worthwhile exercise. Get to make a cool new friend, get to challenge myself, maybe pocket a little bit of money. Okay, I have to put up with the Accurate Miniatures Mitchell to do all that, but I can handle it. And so here we go. Let's take a look at what I accomplished. Okay, so let's talk about this thing. I have done a pretty extensive, exhaustive, some people would probably say, discussion of the Accurate Miniatures 148th b-25b Mitchell earlier on my YouTube channel. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel and rehash all of that stuff. So I'm not going to get just too deep into discussing the kit itself. But I do want to say that most of the issues that I found when I did it the first time are still there. The fact that this is the Academy boxing, which I think before that was the Italeri boxing, which of course before that was the Accurate Miniatures boxing, notwithstanding. These molds have changed hands quite a bit, but that does not, as far as I can tell, mean that they've done a whole lot to make it much less than the terrible kit that it's always been. And yeah, I don't have a problem saying it's a terrible kit. I know that there are people who worship the legend of Accurate Miniatures, but yeah, no, I'm not one of them. And I think at this point, having been through two of these Mitchells, that I have a fairly solid piece of ground to stand on. But they have, but to be fair, I do believe that Accurate Miniatures must have made a few fixes along the way. Sorry about the compressor. Shut up, compressor. Doesn't work as well for me as it does for Dukes. There we go. Anyway, I do believe that Accurate Miniatures made some adjustments, because my good buddy Jimmy D, just strictly as a joke a couple of years ago, after he saw what I had been through with mine, took his out of his stash, ripped all the parts off of the sprues, and used them as packing material when he sent me some paint. Yeah, it was hilarious, especially given how militant some people get about how amazing this kit and everything Accurate Miniatures is. It was pretty funny, but the point is that when I got all of those parts out of the box, I wanted to, I used a bunch of them as paint mules, like the wings and stuff, but out of curiosity, I put the fuselage together. And it looked like they had fixed those problems, because those were pretty major. If you look at my first video series on this thing, you can clearly see the alignment issues on the fuselage, where it's even at each end, but features in between, like the edges of this window here and a little bit back here at the opening for the turret, are clearly misaligned, and then a lot of the places where panel lines go across the fuselage are misaligned by as much as like a millimeter. I mean, it was bad. But with the one that Jimmy sent me, that issue was not there. The fuselage went together, everything lined up pretty well, and it did in this one as well. Nor did I have the issue that I had with version 1.0, where the tail was totally crooked, and I ended up having to, saw it off, fix it, and put it back on. This one, the tail went on perfectly, and I did conclude, I believe, at that time that the issue was with the fuselage halves not being a match, and that caused the tail to sit crooked. So, good on Accurate Miniatures at the time for correcting what were some very major flaws with the way that the fuselage halves lined up. And I've been told by people who were intimately involved with that project that they had tooling issues. But, it would have been great if while they were at it, they had taken care of some other things, because those problems still exist. Everything about the fit of the engine nacelles onto the wing is still terrible. Bad gaps back here. There's still steps on the underside where it joins the wing root between the nacelle and the fuselage. This piece that inserts here on top of the intakes still fits pretty poorly. All of that filling, rescribing. What I did differently on this kit, though, that was a big improvement, is I did pretty much all of my body work with sprue goo. For those of you who may not know, I'm a big champion of sprue goo, and all that is old sprue combined with Tamiya Extra Thin to give you a thick, goopy liquid that, when it dries, basically is polystyrene. And of course, because that's the native material, it scribes and rivets just like native material. It also bonds very well to the base material because, again, you're basically melting and welding styrene into styrene. So I love sprue goo. You'll notice mine is a little bit green. That's because I add a little bit of green lacquer to it just to make it more visible on gray plastic. I use Tamiya and Hasegawa sprue because I know that they are fairly hard and good quality, and I want my filler to be the same thing. So I like it. The one complaint people have, and a lot of this is just mythology that's been perpetrated by people who don't know what the hell they're talking about, is that it takes forever to dry. It doesn't. I've worked it in as little as 8 hours, definitely overnight, usually is fine. If it really takes any longer than that, you're using too much. It's that simple. And then you also run the risk of having some deformations because, again, it's just like if you use too much of a lacquer-based filler putty, like Squadron or Bondo 907 or Combi. If you use too much, you can deform the plastic because it softens it. So anyway, if you're using the right amount, sprue goo is the bee's knees. So that was different in my construction efforts. And a lot of time on rescribing, re-riveting, prime sand. It's like an endless loop sometimes. But I feel like my construction skills were pretty solid to begin with, and I really didn't do a whole lot different other than the sprue goo on version 2.0. But anyway, yeah, the engine nacelle fit, still bad. Had a little bit of an issue getting the wings slotted in there correctly, but they're very sturdy because they've got these spars that go inside, so that's still pretty good. The engine fit engagement, still not great. They give you some alignment features there, but they're not super. Where I had the most trouble on this one was canopy fit. It had a high spot, and I actually did not discover the high spot until after I had enough paint on there for it to really stand out. I mean, when everything was just in black primer, I didn't have enough contrast to notice that the fuselage was sticking up proud by quite a bit from about right here all the way around to about right here. I mean, I had basically done with all of my olive drab paint. And the only thing was to file it down, sand it, and re-rivet it. And I managed to do that without a single scratch on the canopy. So I felt pretty good about that. And I just, I purposely repainted it in a slightly different way than everything else to create some visual interest, because I'm trying to get as much tonal variety in this olive drab as I can. So that was a big issue. Another place where the fit was not great is right here, where the nose piece fits the top piece here. It's a little bit proud right there, and again, didn't notice it until it was too late. Can't do much about it at that point. Let's see, what else? The fit of really all of the clear parts. The fit is terrible. Pretty much every single one of these windows sticks out proud enough that on both kits felt the need to file, sand, and polish them down flush before I could do any masking. But that's just brute force work. It's not terribly difficult. The fit of the turret bubble, still not good. Still had to fiddle with it to get it to go in there. Not, just not great. This entire assembly here of the turret, the way the thing goes together, the guns, and especially the way that the bubble goes on to the structure underneath it, is just plain stupid. There's not any locating features other than this tiny little ridge at the back of the turret bubble for it to sit on. There's nothing that locates it on the center of rotation. It's easy to get it crooked front to back. And then you find after you do all of that it sticks up a little too high and you'll get a gap right here. This was true on both kits. I ended up having to pop it back off, remove some material from the structure underneath it, and then put it back together in order to get the bubble to sit far enough down in there to not have a gap right there. And you can still see it's almost there. The whole thing is just silly. And really everything about the interior, the way that it fits together, is poor. The engineering on the locating features for most of the internal structure is virtually non-existent. And the fit is not great. You'll see up around the cockpit, the front and rear bulkheads of the cockpit are still not good in terms of fit. Just way more of a hassle than it needs to be. They still have the stupid clear instrument panel that you have to try and mask in order to get it painted black and then have clear gauge faces. One of the dumbest things ever. And to be fair, Accurate Miniatures is not the only ones that do that, although they may be the perpetrators of that stupidity. Trumpeter is infamous for doing that as well. So that's some silliness that really needs to stop. Let's see. One-piece props. I will give them props for one-piece props because nobody needs to have to assemble a propeller. So that's really good. Liked that. Those fit on there just as well as they did before. So hey, it's not all bad. I did end up using this time the kit supplied crew doors. And they went in pretty nicely. No issues there. That was a pleasant surprise, by the time I got down to it. The bubble for the rear guns, not good. Didn't fit well. Had to do quite a bit of sanding and polishing. The main gear, still pretty good. They go in easily. The whole main gear assembly on this thing is surprisingly trouble-free, which is nice. Unfortunately, you can't say the same thing about the nose gear. It is still the weak, flimsy piece of shit that you have to put in before you glue the two fuselage halves together. I don't know why we're not smart enough. If we can land on the damn moon, why can't we engineer a Mitchell kit that doesn't require the nose gear to be put in before you put the fuselage halves together? I don't know. It's just irritating. And I solved that by throwing away most of the kit nose gear. I built the main structure of the thing out of brass tubing that I soldered together. And that's basically from the oleo up that I put in there before I assembled the fuselage halves. That way I had only just like that much sticking out. The oleo itself is a piece of stainless steel hypodermic tubing. And I had it all planned out where I could slip that in later after all the paint was done and I was doing final assembly. And then not have to paint it because it was the perfect natural sort of polished steel color. Maybe you can kind of see it under there. So there's that, and then the actual fork on the nose gear is the kit part because it's fine for that. It's strong enough, and it's far stiffer than the only replacement, which is the SAC, which I believe stands for Seriously Assed Up Components, or Scale Aircraft Components. I don't know. Anyway, they suck. They're white metal. They usually show up bent, and they're just very soft. And the one on my original Mitchell is always relaxing into crookedness, and I every now and then, like once every 6 months, I have to reach over there and bend it back into shape. So I don't recommend those, but that is a true multimedia nose gear. Brass, stainless steel, styrene, and I did use the white metal part. There's a brace that runs up into the gear bay. I used the white metal part for that because, you know, why not? It barely shows, and it was straight enough. So anyway, that's it with the landing gear. I did the Bombay open on this one, as you can see, at the client's request. Should have charged him double for that, because that whole Bombay assembly is one of the worst parts of the entire kit. I mean, it is just terrible. The fit sucks. The engineering is not good. It's just a disaster. It didn't get any better with the Academy release. Another thing that's still terrible and is really obnoxious is the fit of these wing lights. I saw a poor guy on Facebook in a modeling group the other day who had done a really nice job with all of his paint, but he hadn't put the landing lights in yet. And I was like, dude, yeah, you may want to stop right now and take care of that, because you're going to end up with a problem. And he had no idea. These they fit terribly, and the only solution is to put them in with. I glue them in initially with extra thin, and then I used this time around, instead of clear epoxy, I used ultraviolet curing glue, which is, you know, basically Bondic. You put it on there, it stays liquid until you shine an ultraviolet light on it, and then it cures up rock hard, and it actually polishes out really well. So I felt like that was a good solution. You know, I mean, the results are not perfect, but they definitely are way, way better than they would have been if I had just installed the kit parts as they fit. One thing I did use that I think is pretty cool, it's hard to see there. Here, I'll make this thing do a wheel stand so that we can see some of these things a little bit better. I used Molotow chrome markers, if it'll focus on that, to do the reflector on the lights, and that's one place where the Molotow chrome markers are perfect. You never have to touch it again. It makes a really reflective surface, so it's super good for that. Okay, so since I've got it doing a wheel stand, I can talk about the latest disaster, and you guys may have already seen that video. Here's even a little bit better look at the nose gear if you want that, although the picture should show that pretty well. I'm pretty proud of that nose gear. It was a lot of work, but I feel like that it's good. Also, you can get a good look at the Def Model wheels, which I love for the most part. The detail on them is super. The tread pattern is fantastic. You even get the little Goodyear thing on there. They do a really good job. They're 3D printed masters, and they're very nice. But the one thing about Def Model wheels that never fails to piss me off is that the center holes are never big enough. I always end up drilling them out, and that's 100% of the time I've used them. And I've probably put Def Model wheels on a half dozen kits at this point. This one was no different. Had to drill out all three wheels to get them to go on their axles, and that's just annoying. Speaking of aftermarket parts, though, I used Quick Boost seats. I used Pavla seats on the original one, and I don't know why I thought they were better, because the Quick Boost seats are much prettier. Very nice, really nicely molded detail on the seat belts. So those were good. But you don't get as many pieces as you get in the Pavla kit. In the Pavla kit, you get this different chin piece and a couple of other little bits. You get different crew hatch doors, but they're not that great, so no big loss on that. Anyway, before I spin it around, let's just continue with this discussion of it being a wheel sitter, tail sitter, sorry. Well, now here, look. Last aftermarket bit, which I just absolutely adore, are the Master gun barrels. Those are little brass two-piece gun barrels. The cooling jacket is separate. They are just so gorgeous. I mean, for $10, it's a slam dunk for me. Just love those things. And if you're careful and precise with the way you assemble them, they really come out nice and straight, and they just look super good. Anyway, so back to the thing that I was about to discuss was it being a tail sitter. The original Accurate Miniatures boxing of this thing comes with brass plates that you insert in the nose. I wasn't confident at the time that that was enough because they didn't all fit, which was irritating, so I added some steel nuts right behind the engine nacelles. And version 1.0 sits on its nose gear just fine. This one, I did it a little bit differently. I have steel nuts in the nacelles, but I used lead shot in the nose because Academy doesn't give you a damn thing to weight the nose with. So I used lead shot, made a little compartment there, super glued it in, thought I was good. I even tested it. I dry fitted the wings, put the gear in, dry fit, and the thing set on its nose. So I thought it was fine. Well, of course, after I had all the painting done and I was all ready to go and I put the landing gear on and flipped it over, damn thing instantly set on its ass. I mean, it wasn't even close. And I ended up, so yeah, that was big drama. If you saw that episode, it's called the nose weight debacle, and you can see how I solved that. But make a long story less long, I ordered some tungsten powder that the golfing guys use to weight their golf clubs, and through various and messy methods, I dumped about 1.5 ounces of it into the engine nacelles in here, and got it done. I mean, you can see it does what it's supposed to do. I mean, it'll still drop on its tail, obviously, because you got a lot of mass with a long lever arm back there. But you know, that's a problem with all glass nose Mitchell kits of any scale. So, you know, if you're looking for a way to solve that problem, look into that tungsten powder. It's good stuff and not super expensive. Just it's messy. Watch the video. Anyway, so where I feel like I really, in my own estimation, showed some progress on this kit over version 1.0 is in my painting and finishing. My basic painting, really kind of the same, although on this one, this is all MRP lacquer as opposed to, on the first one, it was all Tamiya colors, if I remember correctly. I know the olive drab was Tamiya. This is 100% MRP lacquer. Some people are immediately like, well, what about chipping? MRP chips fine. It can be a little bit more difficult, but it depends on how thick you apply it and how long you wait. I try to get to my MRP with my chipping tools within half an hour after I spray it. Basically, my formula is as soon as my airbrush is clean from shooting the color, I start the chipping, and it works pretty good. I have noticed that different colors are, seems like, and it has to do with how glossy they are, I guess, but some of them seem to chip a little easier than others. But the bottom line is MRP chips just fine. You may have to use a toothbrush or this new thing that I have gotten recommended to me. Dukes recommended these brushes. These are called Deerfoot Stipplers, and he recommended them for doing oil painting effects. I find them a little stiff and obnoxious for that, but that makes them perfect for chipping. So you can check into those. I got a set of 5 of them off of Amazon for like $10 or something. Anyway, where I found some refinement in my technique was with oils. When I did my first Mitchell, I was just barely starting to tinker with oils. And to be honest, I hated them at first. I didn't get it. They didn't click for me. I was just frustrated. And but I kept thinking, you know, guys like Mike Rinaldi are getting amazing results with oils. So obviously the issue is me and my technique. And I just kept hammering at it. And it did finally click. And I still don't claim to be an expert at it, but I really do notice a difference in the subtleties that I'm able to achieve, the nuances of tonal variation, just the control that I'm able to get with oils now as opposed to back then. And that's just purely down to experience. Oils are really sensitive to tools and technique. I mean, it matters a lot what brush you use and how you use it. And I was just, quite frankly, ham-fisted. And it took me a long time to figure that out. But everything here is, this is all oil work. These streaks are oil work. For that, I like to use another Duke's recommended brush called a Wisp, and they come in several different sizes, but this is what a Wisp looks like. And it's great because you just put down you kind of paint the basic shape of the streak with a tiny little brush, and then you come along with this thing, and I use it dry for the most part, and then just very lightly start working it. It's easy to control, and it gives you nice streaks with good variety. And that's the key with streaking, I think, is getting some variety. You don't want them all to be the same length. You don't want them all to be the exact same color. It's about variety. But these are characteristic streaks that happen on Mitchell's, and I feel like those came out pretty well. The chipping that I did here, and actually this whole strategy with the way that I went after the tonal variety on this olive drab and really centered around this traffic pattern where people are constantly walking, is that it's black based basically, but I'm not doing just a single pattern layer. I'm doing a pattern layer, and I'm using these stencils that I got. Let me grab one out of my paint booth. These things are made by Art Tool, and they are fantastic. You can see it's got just this sort of crazy pattern in it. And all I do is I just basically lay it down and shoot paint through it and change the orientation. You get 3 of these in each in the package. And it's a great way to very quickly get a random pattern layer, or what a lot of people call the marble layer, when you start your black basing. So what I do is I lay that down. Well, first I do some, like if I have specific panels that I want to be different, like it's gotten lost a little bit, but this panel I wanted to just be a more solid color. So I mask it and paint it. I also pre-shaded, I guess you could say, all of the control surfaces, because on a Mitchell they are canvas, I believe, not the flaps, but the ailerons, the rudders, and the elevators. And for whatever reason, they fade differently. And you'll see this is a characteristic thing with Mitchell's, where all those control surfaces have a different tone to them. And so I masked those off and painted them with MRP Sand Gelb. It's a nice light yellow tan color. And I did that before I shot my blend layer. But anyway, after I do that basic pattern layer with this thing, and any areas that I want to mask off, then I go and I do a little bit of airbrush work at random just to break some of that up. Then I'll do a pattern layer, then I'll do another pattern layer maybe, and then I'll do a blend layer, and then maybe another pattern layer. Point being is, don't feel like that it's a formula of just one pattern layer and one blend layer. And I'm changing my tone constantly with each one of those layers, especially with this one, because the MRP olive drab that I used, or that I started with, I just did not like the tone of it. It was just super dark and kind of just dull and gross looking, and I wanted something that was lighter and greener. And so I was working towards that with each successive layer, and I used the same sand gelb to lighten the green as I went. It works a lot better if you use a green if you use a yellowish color to lighten your green than if you use a white. So I'm not sure where I picked that tip up, but I know it's a solid one. Anyway, same thing on the bottom, same basic strategy. But in this area here, with all of this wing walk stuff, what I did that's different is that after the first couple of pattern layers, I laid down some hairspray, then I did the blend layer, then I chipped, then I did it again. So there's probably 5 or 6 layers of stuff going on here before I ever even got to the oil painting. What I wanted to do was establish that pattern really well before I started doing the subtleties and, you know, the nuances and whatever with the oils. I also used a stippling technique with my airbrush. That's where if you've got an airbrush that has a MAC valve on the front of it, that's that funny little screw that a lot of people think is a pressure regulator. It is not. It is a flow rate regulator. Pressure stays the same no matter what the flow rate is. Anyway, you dial this thing down really tight, and it basically makes the airbrush just spit. And I've done videos about that as a technique as well. So I did some of that on the bottom to reflect, you know, all the trash getting thrown up and, you know, water splashing, oil splatters, whatever it is that, you know, that these aircraft see. And I had a good reference of that actually from a B-25 Mitchell that has been restored, and it flies a lot. And even so, the bottom of it is just filthy with all of those splatters. And so I tried to incorporate some of that. I used some pigments in a few places on my first Mitchell. There isn't a single pigment on this thing, nowhere. Everything that I've done here in terms of weathering is either incorporated directly into the paint or into the oil work. I just don't feel like I'm ever going to use pigments on an aircraft again. I just don't think that they offer as much versatility or control as oils do. They have their place, and I'll continue to use them on ground vehicles, but I don't see myself using them on aircraft anymore. If you saw in the photographs, same thing with the exhaust stains. I laid down a base where I sprayed in the basic pattern, and you can see a little bit of that back here on the tail. That's just a really thin blend of MRP that I made to be kind of the color of black coffee. It's a little brown, it's a little gray, and it's about 70% thinned, even as thin as MRP already is. And it makes a great base for exhaust stains. But then I came back, and I'm not going to even begin to pick this thing up to show you, but I came back and did the exhaust stains with oils. Maybe I can get under there enough to where you can see it a little bit. Maybe if we put it on its butt, you can kind of get under there and see a little. It's hard. Not a good camera angle for that. But anyway, all oils. That's the main takeaway. There is 100% oils. Oils. Washes, oil washes, some enamel washes. I do use the Tamiya panel line washes. I like their hard black for what I call the functional panel lines, which is around anything that opens or moves, like control surfaces or hatches or whatever. You can see a lot of that around where these engine covers come off. Chipping, again, using hairspray. I like hairspray better than any other chipping fluid. Specifically, I've stuck with Rinaldi's recommendation of the Tresemme medium hold fine mist. I do it out of the airbrush rather than out of the can because I can never seem to get it consistent with the can. So I use an airbrush, and typically I do like 2 layers is what it takes me to get that very slight sheen that tells you that you have enough hairspray on. But even still, I mean, you can get too much very quickly, and then your chipping becomes difficult to control. I prefer the chipping to be very hard. Like, I like to have to sit here and really sweat over it because that means that I'm getting really small, delicate chips that are well scaled like those. I think I did those with a stiff brush like this little thing. There we go, like that little thing. But it took me a long time, and I find that a lot of people who are complaining about MRP or whatever lacquer not chipping very well just may not be working hard enough at it. I mean, I'm not calling you lazy. I'm just saying that maybe your expectations are are off, because I know mine were initially. Sometimes you just have to keep scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing, and when you think it should be happening and you're ready to quit, you keep doing it, because it will eventually start to show these little tiny chips, and that's when it just really gets beautiful. And you'll find that once those start, then you have to really be careful, because once the water is allowed in there, then you can start to get bigger hunks of paint flying off, which usually you don't want. So anyway, I think that about covers it. I feel like I've just been spewing and rambling for like half an hour now, and I need to just shut the hell up. I could go into deep detail, as you guys know, on all of this stuff, but I think that basically captures pretty much all of it. Of course, there's one thing I forgot that I think is important to mention, because somebody asked me the other day if I had any gloss coats on this thing. And yeah, I am a proponent of not using unnecessary clear coats, but the key word there is unnecessary. And I don't hesitate to use them if I feel like it is necessary. And so my basic strategy with this, and pretty much everything I'm doing now, is that I do all the paint that I feel like I can, and incorporate all of the weathering stuff into the paint that needs to be done at that time. Then I immediately go and do all of my washes, because especially with MRP, the stuff is smooth enough that washes really flow well, and they don't tend to do that bleed and stain thing that they do on flat paint. So I do like all of my hard panel line washes, the functional panel lines, the other panel lines, and in this case, all of these panel lines are a mixture of oils to get me the right shade of green that I wanted. I do all of that stuff directly on the paint, and once I'm happy with all of that, and that includes, and I've already shot all the insignia at that point too. There's not a single decal on this one. Well, there's one underneath the tail that the client and I agreed on, because his comment was, "Hey, dude, look, artists sign their work, and your signature should be on it." So I have a custom decal that I made underneath the tail. Yes, that is my signature, but that's the only decal on here. Everything else is using Montex masks and is sprayed. And all of that is done before I do any of the panel line washes. Once the panel line washes are down, then I shoot a layer of dull coat everywhere that I'm going to be doing oil work, which is, in this case, the entire thing, because I want to separate the layers so that whatever mineral spirits are about to get involved with the oil paint rendering will not affect any of those panel lines. I want them locked in. I also want the traction that a flat layer provides for oils. I just find that they do much better on a flat layer. I find them to be much more controllable. They stick where I want them to stick, and it's really not that much harder to remove any mistakes than it is with gloss paint. And some people like to do satin finish, and that's fine. That seems to work well. Also, I just don't have a good satin varnish. I have gloss and I have flat. If I need satin, I end up mixing like AK Ultra Matte and Aqua Gloss. But speaking of Aqua Gloss, once I get all of the oil rendering done and it's dry, everything's good, and I give it a couple of days maybe, then I do a nice solid layer of Aqua Gloss. And I like Aqua Gloss because it sprays super easy right out of the bottle. It goes down nice and smooth. I mean, it's a great utility gloss that has never given me any trouble. And it's bulletproof. It makes a nice hard layer that will protect your model from basically any kind of normal handling that you may do afterwards. Fingerprints, whatever, not an issue. And then once I'm satisfied with all of that, taking care of any goobers, any little micro sanding or anything I need to do to fix any little bits of flurm or trash or whatever that may be stuck in that clear coat, then I come back and the final thing that I do is a layer of dull coat over the entire thing to flatten it back out. So I end up with 3 clear layers, 2 lacquer layers, which are very thin, and 1 layer of clear gloss acrylic. And that proves to be, I think, for me, it's the prettiest finish because I like a flat finish. I think these aircraft were pretty flat in real life, but I also feel like that shows the tonal variety the best when you have a nice flat finish. But also it's good protection. And I proved that when I had to fix that nose weight issue because I was handling this thing like a barbarian for like 3 or 4 hours trying to solve that problem. Constantly flipping it over, putting it back on its wheels, and I can't wear gloves. I can't put them on because of the way my hands are. So I try to keep my hands sweat free as much as possible. I try not to grab with my fingertips as much as possible. I try to grab in the crooks of my fingers like that, and that helps. But I really wasn't ever worried about it because I had the confidence of knowing that I had those protective clear layers on there. And that also helped when I had a few super glue goobers after, all of the nose weight drama, and I actually had to sand those down and then re-flat coat in those specific areas. I knew that as long as I was careful, I had a protective layer underneath that super glue. And that gave me the confidence to be, I still had to be very careful, but I knew that I would be able to sand those down to where they would be invisible once I put a little bit of dull coat on them. So anyway, that's it. That was the last point I wanted to make. Okay, so there it is, and it's all of its sordid glory. I think if I had anything to add about this overall experience, it would be about the commission building itself, since I've pretty well covered the kit and the project and the techniques. The bottom line on commission building is don't do it. Yeah, of course it's not that simple. Will I do it again? I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. Again, it all comes down to how compelling the project is. But I will say this. I will not ever be doing any commission work purely for the money. Because my business case justification was a total failure. And I kind of knew it would be. I priced the thing partly based on the hours that I felt might be reasonable, but I always had in the back of my mind, yeah, that's probably not going to be enough. And it wasn't. I spent 161 hours, and I kept pretty good track of it, on this project. And I promise you, I didn't bid anywhere close to that number of hours. I knew I was going to be slow, so I accounted for some of that, but not by not by as huge a factor as that worked out to be. But that's okay, because there's also the matter of what the market will bear. And I had taken a look around to see what other commission builders were asking for their work, and so I felt like the number that I gave was in the right ballpark for that, and would also be if I hit the right number of hours, which I did not. So again, if you've ever thought about doing commission building, I guess the one thing I would say is make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And if you think money is that reason, you just stop right where you're at and go a different direction, because you're not going to have a good time. So, but anyway, overall, I have to say that as much stress as the project involved, it was relatively drama-free, and part of that was because my skills had gotten better, and largely because I knew all the traps with this kit. Other than the nose weight debacle there at the end, it really was pretty straightforward. It's just a big project to take a kit like this and work it over to the level of quality that I felt like the client and I deserved. So, because you should never let yourself down in terms of quality. Even if you're your only customer, don't sacrifice your standards. At any rate, it's all done, and I am super glad, and I can't even tell you, it's been a part of my life for 10 months now, which oddly enough is about exactly the same amount of calendar time that the first one took. So at any rate, I'm super glad it's done, and I hope that, as usual, that this little bit of video was useful and informative for you guys. And I definitely appreciate you watching. Much love.